Hello, this is lesson 1 on the poem Remains. Just bear with me while I try. I'm still trying to work out how to use this program properly. If I click on that. Right, you should now be able to see the screen. And so just before we start, just a few technical things. If you're using Windows, then it might be an easy way to do your work, that you can just put it right to the left and it should go like that, and then you can have your document if you push that to the right, and you should be able to type on there as well, and you can have me playing on here rather than Ronan Keating, Life is a Roller Coaster. So if we move on to the lesson today, interpretation. So this is before we start. So this is everything that you need to think about when you're doing poetry. All right, the interpretation. The poem or a song or anything belongs to the writer, but the interpretation belongs to you. All right, it's up to you how you interpret it. Okay, so think about all the songs you listen to the lyrics, they'll mean something different to you than they might do to someone else, and that's exactly the same as in as when we're doing poetry. I really like this quote, actually. It's Noel Gallagher's being interviewed about his about the song Champagne Supernova, and someone says about the ridiculous lyrics, and he says, "What do you mean by that?" And the lyric is, "Slowly walking down the hall faster than a cannonball." And he says, "I don't know what it means." All right, but are you telling me when you've got 60,000 people singing it, they don't know what it means? It means something different to every one of them. And I think that just kind of sums up what we need to do with the poetry, really. Your interpretation should be different to anyone else's, and that's including mine. So during this lesson, I'll go through what I interpret the poem to be, but that's not necessarily the right answer. All right, only you've got the right answer, because it's about how you respond to the poem, and it's how the words make you think and feel. And if you can kind of adopt that attitude of being really confident in going to what you think you need to do, then that's really important, and you should be able to do well. So keep that in mind throughout all the poetry unit. All right, it is your interpretation. We're not looking for any right answers or anything like that. So 3 things really we need to do over this unit is to gain a knowledge of the poems. As I said in the previous video, there's 15, so it's really important that we know all of them. Also that you're able to analyze different aspects of a poem, so the language, the structure, and things like that. It's a little bit different to how we've approached the previous text. And then to be able to compare 2 poems is kind of the ultimate goal that we'll be working on. We'll do a bit in this unit, but also next year as well, when we're all back in school. So these are poems. I've kind of grouped them in my way that I think makes sense, and this will just help you kind of target which poems to really know well. And it's good to know certain poems across the board that we'll be able to compare well to each other. So for example, we're doing Remains today, and that works well with War Photographer. There's no correct way of grouping these. It's just a way of that I do to kind of help me and to help some students. But like I say, for example, Bayonet Charge will compare really well to Exposure, or Ozymandias will compare really well to My Last Duchess. So it's not to say that you can't go across these, all right, but all these poems are in there. And if you can kind of target certain themes that run across the different poems, then it should help you when it comes to comparing. But obviously we're only on the first one now, so we don't need to look at this too much. So what I want you to do now is to just pause the video and read the poem, read Remains. If you've got the anthology, obviously you'll find it in there. If not, then just a quick Google, or I'll attach the poem in an email when I send you this link out as well. So yeah, pause the video here, and sorry, that was Google. And so just pause the video there and have a go at these questions, write them down, and then add it to the Word document that you'll send me at the end of this. Okay, so now you've done that, just before we get into the poem, we need to go for a few key words. All right, I'll try and embed as many keywords as we can into the different lessons as possible. So firstly, we've got enjambment, which basically means the poem goes from one line to the next with no punctuation. All right, and a similar technique is caesura, okay, where the poet uses punctuation mid-line to create a pause. For us at this level, we don't need to look too far into it, just those simple explanations should suffice. Also, assonance, all right, is similar to alliteration. It's the repetition of a vowel sound, okay, whereas your alliteration is a repetition of a consonant sound. So again, if you can just pause the video at this point, I really need you to understand these key terms. So whether you do a little bit of Googling or you write these definitions down, and just before you resume the video, please make sure you've got a good understanding of what these words mean. Okay, so when we're looking at the context, so this poem was written by Simon Armitage in a collection called The Not Dead. The collection talks about different soldiers' experiences of war, and Remains is based on a real life situation. So I think Armitage did a lot of work with different soldiers and got their stories, and that's not to say Remains is specifically about this story. Yeah, the story from the soldier that Armitage got may have just been a stimulus to write something else. And so we need to think about where the poem is set, what time frame the poem's set in. Some people say it could be about the Gulf War. I'm not too sure about that. It could possibly be. But I think it's particularly more towards the Iraq War in 2003. And we sent a lot of troops over there at that time. And I think what's important to understand, and in terms of my interpretation of the poem, is that after a bit of conflict over a few months or a year even maybe, the war, is what we call a war, kind of stopped, and our troops were over there in Iraq, and were there to police the place rather than actively being at war. And I think, obviously we don't know, but for my interpretation, I think that is important to think about. But obviously your interpretation is the most important. So obviously you've read the poem now, so we know it's about a soldier who's suffering from some post-traumatic stress disorder. So the events that happened while he was out over there obviously impacted him greatly, and we see in the poem he turns to drink, he turns to drugs. So is the poem all about guilt or PTSD? Is it more about the horrors of war? Or is it a criticism of the culture that's created within the army? And again, could possibly be all three. Like I say, it's not our job to think about what Armitage has done. It's just our job to interpret it in our own way. Okay, so obviously you've read it already. Let's get on to some analysing it. So if you've got your anthologies, feel free to kind of write your own annotations, write some of my annotations down, that's fine. Just to make decent annotations, you just need to make sure you're writing things that make sense to you. So if you are using my annotations, make sure that you've understood why you've made that annotation, and hopefully then you can create a revision bank. if you haven't got your anthology, if you weren't in school when we gave you those out, don't worry. You can do this on pen and paper. You could do it on a Word document. It's up to you, and we can always print those out, staple them to your anthologies when you get them. Okay, so on another occasion, we get sent out to tackle looters raiding a bank. So it starts mid-conversation, so we know this character who's speaking is talking to someone. Could it be a friend? Could it be a therapist? Could it be in his diary? We don't know. But by saying on another occasion, we think about, obviously there's some other things that's happened prior to this. And I've just circled that pronoun we, and I'll talk about that at the end of the poem. So we got sent out to tackle looters. It's talking about the team, so to speak. And I just wanted to pick out this one word. So when you're looking at one word language analysis, we've got to think about, right, why has Armitage chosen this specific word? All right, so to tackle looters raiding a bank. So obviously we've got people raiding a bank, but they've been sent out to tackle them. And we know by reading the poem that, well, they shot him quite a number of times. So tackle is a really innocent verb. We associate it with sport, and it's not something that you would associate with death, perhaps. So to tackle, that's my first kind of thing about maybe is this a criticism of the army's culture and things like that? Tackle is a sport. Sports are a game, all right? Do they see this? Do the soldiers see operations like this as some sort of game to them? And one of them legs it up the road, probably armed, possibly not. And so we've got that probably armed. And again, that comes to this mindset that these people are the bad guys. But if you think about it, these people are in a war-torn country. They could be desperate. We don't know the reasons why people were raiding the bank, but you don't know what lengths people would go to. So, I mean, we don't know if these people were violent or anything like that. So, I mean, again, that probably armed. It comes to this mindset that, oh, they're the bad guys. All right, but actually, are they the bad guys, or are the soldiers the bad guys in certain spaces? And then possibly not. There's that doubt in his mind already. Well, myself and somebody else are all of the same mind. And this idea, he's not naming these people. He's saying somebody else and somebody else. All right. Would it matter who he was with? Yeah. Are they all programmed the same? You go into the army and there's this culture of this kind of possibly this toxic masculinity that's in there, and are they all programmed to kind of be of the same mind and react in the same way rather than an individual? And so again, some blame to how these soldiers are acting could be given to who is training them and who is kind of giving this mindset. So all three of us opened fire, and remember, this guy legged it up the road. And I think that's really important. Obviously this person is panicking, armed or not. He's not causing a threat if he's legging it up the road. And so all three of us opened fire. That's their natural instinct to shoot. But was this person a threat? Is this the right thing to do? So there's this theme of morality here, that should the soldiers there be opening up fire? Would they get away with that today? We don't know. And it describes them as three of a kind, all letting fly. Three of a kind is a hand in poker. It's not a bad hand, but it's not one of the best hands either. So it's almost like a
50-50 gamble that they've got going on, kind of like the probably am, possibly not. This gamble that they're taking this decision to end this person's life. And I swear I see every round as it rips through his life. Okay, and this is obviously earlier you looked at the term enjambment, and so we go to the next stanza with no break. And when we're looking at enjambment and we're looking at caesura, it's really important to look at the pace, and does the pace of the poem reflect anything that's going on in the poem? And so does this, if something happens, something significant, sometimes we look back and we think about how fast it went. So could that be reflecting how fast all this kind of unraveled and how his life changed just in a blink of an eye? I see broad daylight on the other side. So we've hit this looter a dozen times. A dozen. So 12 times. And if there's 3 of them, that we're saying that they've taken about 4 shots each. Is that necessary? And I think that we've got to look back to the culture and how these soldiers are handling this situation. And to shoot someone 12 times is quite extreme. And he's there on the ground, sort of inside out. So that's really horrifying imagery. But it's almost written impassively, like these soldiers, or in particular this soldier, it's not really registering as something horrifying. It's just casual, sort of inside out. Pain itself, the image of agony. One of my mates goes by and tosses his guts back into his body, then he's carted off in the back of a lorry. And again, it's this impassive attitude. They've dehumanized the looter to toss his guts back into his body and then just chuck him on a lorry. They're not treating this person as, no matter what they've done, they're not treating them as a human at all. And I think we can have a degree of kind of sympathy for this looter. We've got the assonance in the body, lorry. Just like alliteration, we think about assonance, it draws our attention to it, emphasizes something important. So could this be emphasizing just how the kind of abhorrent way they've treated this person? And as we get into the next stanza, I think the structure and the punctuation use is really, really important. All right, so it says end of story, except not really. Okay, so we've got the alliteration in we've got the caesura in there, end of story, and there's a comma. All right, you'd expect a full stop at the end of the story. All right, but obviously this isn't the end of the story. This is going to continue, it's going to follow him, and things like that. So we think it should be the end, but it's not. Okay. His blood shadow stays on the street, and out on patrol I walk right over it week after week. Is this blood shadow metaphorically? Doesn't mean it has to be a literal kind of stain of blood where it happened. It's just could be something in his head that he's constantly being reminded of what's happened with him having to be in this situation so many times. I walk right over it week after week. So we got that repetition there. All right, these haunting thoughts are following him over and over. And then again, we've got the caesura. Then I'm home on leave. Okay, so again, if someone's home on leave, coming home, they're putting that behind them and they can have kind of a normal life. So again, we have got a full stop there, and you'd expect that's the end. That's the end of the line, but it's not. Okay, because again, these thoughts are just following him
Okay, so then we've got the enjambment here. But I blink and he bursts again through the doors of the bank. Okay, so again, the enjambment by rolling onto this next line. Okay, it's like this thought is following him home. He can't escape from it. He bursts again through the doors of the bank. Sleep, and he's probably armed and possibly not. All right, again, we've got that repetition there, that phrase again. And it's that doubt, that constant, it's probably that doubt that's haunting this character, I think. Dream, and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds. So we see that, again, it's just getting worse and worse. It's manifested itself into his head. He cannot escape it, despite these coping mechanisms, the drink and the drugs, that it's trying to find some escapism, perhaps, from this. So then we get onto the last bit. So he's here in my head when I close my eyes, dug in behind enemy lines, not left for dead in some distant, sun-stunned, sand-smothered land, or 6 feet under in desert sand. So really hear that, sibilance. And like we've said, why is he emphasizing it? And I don't know, could it show some anger? It's almost like he's got some disdain for this land where he's had to go, and is he blaming being in this place for the condition that he's been in? And then, as you notice, all the stanzas before have been 4 lines, and now we've got a short stanza. So structural points like that are really important to pick up on. So, but near to the knuckle, here and now, his bloody life in my bloody hands. We seem to have a Lady Macbeth reference there. We know from studying that play as well that the blood on the hands is kind of a metaphor for guilt. And so is the fact that this stanza seems to have been cut short, maybe not the end of his physical life, although we do suspect that Lady Macbeth may have ended her life, but perhaps it could reflect the end of the life as he knew it, the end of his former life, where he was normal and he didn't have this trauma following him around. But again, come back to me, tell me I'm wrong, tell me your thoughts on why the poet's done something like this. And then the last thing then, I said I'd come back to it. My bloody hands here. Okay, so the pronoun in stanza 1 was we. All right, it was a team effort. There was the 3 of them, and it was like a joint decision. And then by the end of the poem, it's turned to my. It's almost like he's kind of taken on that guilt as if it's all his fault now, and kind of shows how that guilt has kind of developed over time and perhaps got even stronger. So they were just a few annotations. I mean, you can analyze a lot more. You don't really need to, as long as you've got a good bank. You're not everything we've spoken about in this video, you're not going to be able to put into your exam. But again, and the tasks after this will try and encourage you to really engage with the poem yourself and pick out some of these things and come up with your own ideas, which is, like I said, really, really important. Okay, so you've got your tasks here then. I won't go through 1, 2, and 3. They're pretty self-explanatory. Number 4 is your kind of essay style question. And because we've got nothing to compare it to just yet, I'm just going to give you a kind of an unseen poetry style question to respond to it. And so if you just have a look at this document I sent out, I can send it out again, or it's in SharePoint, should help you kind of know how to structure your response. And so for this one, because you've had to watch quite a lot today, including the first video, I don't need a full response, but I'd just like a good completed paragraph for you in response to the task 4 that's on the slide. Okay, so if I leave this here, you can pause that now, or it's the end of the video anyway. And these are your tasks for you to do and get those sent over. So I hope you enjoy the process, and I'm looking forward to seeing all your different ideas.